Joining me is attorney Mike Papantonio, co-host of Ring of Fire Radio. Great to have you back on the show. I want to talk about some of the commentary you've been doing about the future of the Republican Party. It seemed for, I don't know, maybe like 5 minutes after the 2012 election that Republicans maybe were accepting that the right-wing social agenda may just not have long-term appeal to voters and maybe they need to change their views on some things. And then it seemed like the focus shifted to just figuring out ways to continue gerrymandering and changing how electoral votes are counted, kind of not accepting that there's a problem with the platform. What's your sense of that? And also talk a little bit about where the Tea Party fits into this, if at all.
Well, you have leadership in the party still in denial, David. You've got a couple of people like Karl Rove. His new effort, of course, is to go ahead and do battle with the Tea Party, because he understands that, in his mind at least, he thinks the Tea Party is the critical factor on why Republicans are getting trounced. If he was realistic with himself, he'd understand that the same thing you and I and everybody that talks about demographics understands, is it's far more than simply a couple of lunatic Tea Party types coming in and making it difficult for even moderate Republicans to be elected. The Republicans made a terrible mistake, and that is they got sucked into the Tea Party crazy talk too quickly without ever reflecting what did it mean in the long run. In the long run, what it meant is they alienated women, they alienated minorities, they alienated the labor movement, they alienated virtually everybody below 40 years old. And so you don't just change that quickly. That doesn't just turn around. So when you can't change something quickly, what ends up happening is part of that group who can't deal with that reality, they go into their alternative reality. They go into denial. And the denial is, we're going to change politics simply by gerrymandering everybody out of business, changing the electoral college votes, and that if we do all these underhanded, corrupt things that we're already associated with as Republicans, people think of the Republican brand as corrupt. If we continue to be corrupt, we're going to be okay. Nothing's further from the truth.
Well, you're right that there are some Republicans who understand what seem to be pretty clear numbers, because when you look at fair polling on a number of issues, should the government provide some basic level of health care to everybody? On abortion, for the first time, we have over 50% believing that abortion should basically be legal in almost all cases. Gun control, 70, 80, 90% of Americans support individually most of the Obama gun control proposals. Gay marriage, now more than 50% of Americans believe that at least civil unions should be legal. These numbers don't bode well for the standard Republican social agenda, but I just don't see anybody coming down and saying, you know what, as Republicans, we no longer have these views. I just don't see it.
David, it's so the whole, as this thing plays out, as the whole picture plays out, you understand that there's a whole movement within what used to be very, very much the Republican establishment, that now they've tried to label it the no labels movement. We are members of the no labels movement. You've got people like Joe Scarborough and all the folks from Daily Beast, and in there mixed a couple of Democrats who've come forward and said, gee whiz, we're getting trounced from the label standpoint. And these no-label people are smart enough to understand what we have to do is not talk about labels anymore. We can't talk about the teabag Republican. We can't talk about how crazy their concepts are. And this movement, in that movement, are the moderates. In that movement are the moderates who understand we have to shift. Unfortunately, the Fox News group and the teabag movement, the Koch brother movement, has been so successful and so strong that they've moved them so far to the right that a no labels kind of movement, the no labels movement, David, is we're really not Republicans. Right. You're really not Democrats. Let's ignore the man behind the curtain. This is not real. And it's to suggest to us that if we don't label anybody, that's good politics. But those are the same people who helped create the disaster called the Tea Party. And in the end, they have to live with this thing. It's devouring them.
I want to talk about two states, and I want the honest opinion from you, not, a left-wing optimism, which you and I may often share in many cases, on Georgia and on Texas. What are the chances, and what is the path to Georgia possibly becoming a swing or blue state, and also a lot of Democratic money going into Texas, probably some possibilities there as well?
The only thing that'll shift Texas, David, is a dramatic demographic shift that is taking place. But understand, nothing in politics is permanent. Simply because we came out of this election cycle doesn't mean that Republicans can frame concepts. We have to call it what it is. In the early days of Republican politics, we saw them frame the concepts that moved them into the White House, moved them in the Senate and Congress, where at one point they were so buoyed up by their good decision making, by their smart political maneuvering, that they actually thought that they would be in the presidency for 35 years. So a whole control of politics for at least that long. But here's the problem. We discount their ability to adjust. They are adjusting. They're adjusting in places like Florida, for example. They're doing the same thing in Texas. They understand the reality is they've lost. So they're playing a long game right now. The long game is we may not win this next cycle, but we have to prepare for 2 cycles down the road. Don't discount Republicans and think it's over for Republicans. It may be over for the crazy right-wing frenzied Republicans, but it's not over for the people who understand we have to now take a new path. And I think so many times all they have to do is moderate their tone, David. They don't have to, you don't have to have Republicans that come out and shift completely on things like taxes. Understand, as demographics change, you have the demographics change economically too. You have Hispanics now that are moving up the economic ladder. All of a sudden, the lower tax has appeal to them. They're smart enough to understand if they moderate their tone, they can go in there and they can rebuild the party. So yes, here's what I think. I think Texas is a wonderful example of a place that has great potential to become Democratic, but don't think it's going to happen simply on its own. Don't think it's going to happen simply without the Republicans trying to adjust. They're already trying to adjust.
All right, Mike Papantonio, co-host of Ring of Fire Radio. Pleasure as always to have you on the show.
Thank you, David.